Hello, and welcome to another IJA podcast with an absolute phenomenon in the field of anesthesia, Dr. Sophia Chew. She's a cardiac anesthesiologist with over 20 years of clinical experience. She's an adjunct associate professor at Singapore General Hospital. Dr. Chew has pioneered work in acute kidney injury following cardiac surgery and is an industry leader on this. She's a role model for students from all walks of medicine, undergraduate studies to postdoctoral students, with many awards under her belt for her mentoring and teaching prowess. Welcome, ma'am, to the IJA podcast. We're really excited to have this tete-a-tete with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It is my privilege to be here today and to have a little chat.
We're very happy to have you with us and to have this conversation with you. So, anesthesia was once viewed as an end specialty. That's obviously not the case anymore. But what made you decide that you wanted to pursue a super specialization in cardiac anesthesia in 1997? And you had to leave to the United States of America to do the same. So what inspired that decision?
Well, I think, one of the important organs at that time would have been the heart. It's one of the things that anesthesiologists pay a lot of attention to, don't you think?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes. So,
we need a beating one.
And I think it's fascinating that, cardiac surgery is one of the really life-saving surgeries that one can do. And cardiac disease is also like the third most common cause of death in our country. So I think to be able to do something in that area would be something I think would be a very satisfying career. And so I decided that I will take it up and, see where it leads to.
How did you go about this process? So where did you do your cardiac anesthesia? Let's begin there. And how did you enter that platform?
Right. So once I finished my specialization examinations, so in Singapore, you graduate with a MBBS. I think it's very similar to India. And then you seek to do a specialty, which is, in my case, I chose to do anesthesia. So we enter a training program at that time. These days is renamed a residency program. So after you qualify as a specialist, having passed your requisite exams, then we can decide to subspecialize. So I decided that I wanted to do cardiac anesthesia. I also wanted to choose a system which is kind of different from the Commonwealth system of the healthcare in our parts of the world. So that's why I first of all decided I would try to see what the American system, healthcare system is like, what the American academic institution is like. Having done that, then with the help of a scholarship from the Ministry of Health, which we have to apply for, I then wrote a lot of letters to different centers in the United States to look for a fellowship position. So as it happened, I managed to get an interview with the Duke University Hospital. And at that time, the cardiac chief happened to be coming to my part of the world. He was going to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, for a conference. So I flew up to meet him, and I landed myself a fellowship position, and I arrived in Durham, North Carolina, where Duke is located.
So you chased your dream in this case.
Yes, I did. I have to, you basically have to plan what to do, and try to see where the road leads. So I wrote to a few centers, and as it turned out, Duke offered me a cardiac fellowship position.
All right. And you were there for how long, and when did you return to Singapore?
I was there for a year with my family.
Okay. That's wonderful. And in your years since, you have done some impeccable research work with over 50 publications. Who first set you on this path? Were there any key mentors in your life that started you on the research journey?
I think in those days, research was still at a fledgling state in Singapore. But as part of the postgraduate exams and before you become a specialist, we need to show that we have done some sort of research. So we have to seek out, mentors in the local system, think of some research ideas. So I did some publication, mainly like surveys, when I was much younger. When I went over to Duke University Medical Center, I then saw how they, as a huge department, was able to look into doing research in a collaborative manner with data from all the patients that go through anesthesia within the department. So in cardiac anesthesia itself, they have a huge database. So for a person like myself coming in to do a 1-year fellowship, it was relatively easy for me to just tap into the system, come up with a research question, and then do some data analysis and start to publish a paper. And that's how I got started on looking into acute kidney injury after cardiac surgery.
So that began in your fellowship?
That began in fellowship, yes.
So you started small. I mean, not small, but you started with what you had accessible to you.
Yes.
And then you went from there, because when we see now you have multi-country studies that you have ongoing, but when you started with what was available, what you could access easily.
That's correct. So I think what opened my eyes was that database research is really, in a way, fairly easy for us to do because, especially in India, your database will be huge, but it has to be, a deliberate effort. You must make sure your data is clean, your data is collected in the proper manner, etc., etc. So there must be some corporate governance over your data. And then from there, actually, a lot of questions can be asked. And these questions are basically just questions that anyone can ask. So, for instance, if you look at acute kidney injury or AKI, we started off, when I started off in Duke, we were looking at some of the genetic polymorphism because at that time they had a landmark paper on cognitive dysfunction that came out of Duke at that time. So our focus, instead of the brain, we were focusing on the kidney, right? So if you think of that, cardiac surgery and post-operative outcomes, there are many organs that are affected in the whole perioperative period. So my focus was just on AKI initially. So when I came back to Singapore, I then started a database with some funding. And so I then wanted to look at local data. And, essentially what is important in your country. Who are these patients that get AKI? Why do they get it? So those are risk factors, and what is their short-term, long-term outcomes? And so we took our data and we then connected with the National Disease Registry. So in Singapore, if anyone ends up with end-stage renal disease, it is mandatory to report it to the registry. So we could actually match some of these variables together. And so it gives you a glimpse of what happened to your cardiac surgical patient in the short term as well as in the midterm. So that was very, very interesting for us. So we not only looked at AKI at that time, then we decided we should look at atrial fibrillation and stroke.
Okay.
So that's how, from one small idea, it grows because you say, oh, we look at AKI and CKD and ESRT. What about AF? Do they get strokes? So, these questions were just simply, out of what we are seeing, in the patient's outcomes, and we go from there to look for those answers. So after you have kind of looked at phenotyping your patients and understanding the risk factors and their outcomes, then the next stage would be, can I better predict, who are the at-risk patients? So you look not only at clinical variables, but you want to look at other variables that are at the cellular level. So, we started with some genomic data, but as you heard in the lecture earlier that I gave, we are now looking at a lot more of the biological underpinnings of a lot of these poor outcomes. because now we have tools to look into the immune system, the transcriptomic systems, the metabolomics, because what we are looking at as clinician is just clinical surrogates. But we don't really know why are these clinical surrogates, how do they affect what is happening at the cellular level? So, that's where basic sciences come in. So in a way, it opened my mind. See, research, looking at clinical data, you realize that it is not as fine a tool to predict as you like. So then you go into the genomic, and then you go into the immune system, etc., etc. So with one research question, you will then actually have a lot more other research questions that come on, right? And then you get people interested to look into the funding to do those kind of research. So that's how we get started. And after you look at the outcomes, you look at the biological underpinnings, then it will be the treatment. Can we offer better treatment, right? Can we improve the resilience in these patients? Can we preempt these from occurring? And so the research never ends. They were just, you get more new questions coming in every day.
So you went from identifying whether there is a connection, then identifying risk factors. So once you had risk factors, you could sort of predict who would have the outcomes. Then moving on to genomic studies to further identify at-risks.
Yes.
And finally, you ended up with possibilities of treating.
That's correct. That's correct.
So,
and in between that, you also need to monitor patients, right? So we did a little bit of predictive algorithms to see how we can better, predict or preempt. So, a lot of things happen post-operatively. And that's because we anesthesiologists are not there in the post-operative period. One of the reasons I would submit is that anesthesia has become so safe in the OR is because we are there, and we, like they say, the gut feeling, we know something's not going right, something's going south, we jump in and we prevent the escalation of problems. But post-operatively, a lot of things are picked up too late. But we can't be there
everywhere. Yeah.
And that's where technology has to come in. And that's so an area that I also am very interested in, to look at how we can use technology to flag out patients at risk in the post-operative period so that treatment can be given in an expeditious manner.
Must appreciate your big work and your contribution.
Thank you.
Just explaining about the data collection and the registry program. I fully agree. If we have a data of the perioperative care of a patient, we can generate a lot of hypotheses.
Exactly.
For sure. Can you just elaborate for our IJA listeners to this podcast? What do you mean exactly by data collection? I mean, how you do it, and how do you integrate with your registry programs so that at the end of the day, we have something robust, say 10,000 patients, 20,000 patients, and you can come up with robust finding that this is the limitation in the existing clinical work. We need to work on this, or this is the complication or limitation happening in my clinical care based on that registry program. Can you just elaborate? Because at many countries, usually they don't have a very robust registry program for many of the surgical procedures. So how do you maintain it, and how will you suggest the beginners how they should maintain their data in what format?
Well, I think, the most important thing is to decide the research question you're trying to answer. So you must have something that you are very interested in. It could be AKI after cardiac surgery. It could be stroke after cardiac surgery. It could be sepsis. So you need to define what is the aim of this research. Once you have that, then you need to know where is your data coming in. So a lot of times I think in a very busy clinical practice, I'm not sure if it's all computerized, but in our practice right now, Some of it is computerized, so we could actually pull the data out from our system. But if you do not have, then, if there's a possibility of engaging some research coordinator to basically, get those data that you want. So what kind of data you want? Obviously, there will be demographic data, there will be the intraoperative data and postoperative data. So someone needs to basically look at the source of all these data and make sure that the source is giving you the true data. And whether it is computerized or not computerized, you have to decide on the number of variables you want to collect and how long you want to collect it for. So that's what we started off by defining the scope of the whole project. If you have a very huge number of patients coming into your center, then you can collect, a lot of data. But the problem is, how do you make sense of all these data? So you must have the question that you want to answer first, so that you're collecting the correct data, So I think that's important. And data comes from different sources. So you need to make sure that that's the source of truth, right? So you have laboratory data. Which laboratory data? Is it on the first POD, for instance? So if it's AKI, there are certain criteria of serum creatinine that everyone will agree that this is AKI. So you need to make sure that you have those data.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you need to, first of all, sit down and say which research question you're trying to answer first, and then frame the rest of your database to capture the relevant data in order to answer the question that you have posed. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dr. Chew is coming on a very important aspect. We do a lot of case, and if you decide that this is my planning for perioperative care for a patient, I need to have this data. Unless we have a data, it's difficult to make some meaningful conclusion that this is limitation. This is doing very good. This is not so good. I need to improve upon. And if you have the data, probably you can take some decision. You can audit your data to reach something. And I'm sure Dr. Chew has been a very good hand for the budding researchers and seasoned researchers also. You have to think of the research questions. And those research questions comes when you try looking onto your data, because finally you have to manage a patient. And once you have those data, you can always look for. And in this world of technology, even India and the other countries do have a lot of digitalization, and we need to learn or integrate how to capture data. And she mentioned very clearly that the capture of data is from our assessment, that we do preoperative assessment. We can capture the data from our monitoring system. It's pre-human dynamics.
Right.
We need to understand that how many hypotensive episodes.
Exactly. Yes.
That can only be captured if we can have a intra, which you rightly mentioned.
Intra-monitoring.
Also the post-operative assessment, where we are looking for AKI, we are looking for urine output, we are looking for laboratory parameters we can capture from there. And simultaneously, the other important aspect is now we are integrating many bedside monitors.
Yes.
So if we can integrate those pictures of, say, ultrasonography or, say, a transthoracic echo and other films, I think those data will give us meaningful.
Absolutely. I think that would be a fabulous, database and data resource. And, India is huge. You do deal with a huge number of patients. So I think if you can just systematically collect all this data, it will be our pleasure to be able to collaborate with you, And that brings you were asking me about multi-center, because Singapore is very small. So the only way you can have big enough numbers to make sure your analysis, your data is robust, is to collaborate with centers all over the world and collect these data, because essentially we're all dealing with very much the same problems. And that would be really helpful and really interesting to see. I think we share many of the same sort of poor outcomes, whether it's a Singaporean population or an Indian population. So we can share, and then we look at the bigger picture, and then we'll see what is it in this makeup of this particular patient group, is there some other factors that one group does worse than the other? And we learn from each other.
Actually, I think Vedhika must be feeling
That's
same questions he was asking to other IJA. Can we initiate a multi-centric study? Because
yeah.
the bigger the data is, better conclusion we can make. And I think you're open to have collaboration with India really is, and we will be able to have and collaboration. Because when we talk about the demographic profile, working on various guidelines, we understand that Singapore, India, and various other Asian countries probably have a little similar demographic and genetic profile.
Oh, yes, definitely. Absolutely. Yes.
So your work on Pegasus, I was just going to come to that. That was your genomic studies, the role of ethnicity in morbidity following cardiac surgery. We're sort of already on that page right now. What made you investigate the nature component of nature versus nurture? And how relevant do you think it is to perioperative outcomes?
Well, I think we would all agree. Sometimes you have patients with very similar risk profile.
Mm-hmm.
They go for surgery, but at the end of the surgery, their outcomes could be very different.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the surgery went well, but one patient may do worse. One patient just flies and goes home. So that's set us thinking. And that's why, our interest is beyond clinical surrogates. Because we've all been told you keep your blood pressure above this number, you keep this, we do all.
Everything will be fine.
Yeah. But there must be something else that we're not doing quite right. So what is it that in this patient, when he undergoes a similar stress, what is it in his milieu, in his genetics, in his metabolomics, his proteomics, his everything at that level? How is it that it's different for him that is associated with poor outcome? Because what we're seeing are really the downstream effects, which are your clinical surrogates. They're just surrogates.
So internal milieu.
Yeah, so that's what set us thinking of pursuing this. But now we have even better ways of looking at that, using very advanced kind of predictive algorithms, using the latest in the science. So you have a lot of information that can come out just from taking blood samples to study your immune system. And it's really fascinating science that I'm learning from my basic scientist friends who are collaborating with us on this project.
So you're working on using AI to predict outcomes after surgery?
You have a lot of, so you have all these fancy, throughputs of all the different biomarkers, the immune markers, etc., etc. And in order to make sense out of the multiple information you can get through all these chips, you send your blood through all these chips, you need some machine learning algorithms to try to associate the profile of patients with poor outcome from those with, good outcome.
Those markers.
So, we started off with just looking at single nucleotide polymorphism, but now you evolve to doing better, a whole immune system profiling. So I think that is where, we are hoping that we can find some of the answers to why one patient does better than another patient.
Yeah. That's fascinating, going all the way down to literally the genetic makeup of an individual and trying to see how they would fare when put under a surgical stressor.
Yes.
So you're involved in the research work CPOD that is looking into neurocognitive decline and delirium postoperatively. This is multi-centric, it's international. What are your key undertakings? What are the key elements in undertaking such a massive project? And how do you goal set? I mean, so many different people collaborating. We would love to be able to collaborate with Singapore on this, but how do you set realistic, achievable goals and manage everyone's expectations in this process?
Well, I think it starts off with making sure that, we have regular communication with your group of collaborators. It also starts, even before that, with finding your collaborators, right? So I think that's one of the things that we need to build up our network. So having people who are willing to work with us, going to meetings, going to conferences, getting to know the leadership, and trying to understand what we can do as a community. And if everyone has that kind of idea, then we say we will start off with something that is easy to collect. So we designed the study. We had the aim, we designed the study, and then we basically then get feedback from our collaborators. But you need to have a leader in each of these multi-center trials to be able to come together. You have your investigators meeting so that you can make sure that your protocol is robust. And then after that, we need to see along the way, you need to have regular feedback sessions to see whether you can be able to achieve the goals.
So frequent communication, clear communication.
Clear communication, frequent communications are key to a lot of these multi-center trials. And you can have different models of working with different groups because these also involve some sort of funding. So in some of the countries, we try to see if there are other collaborators or other funding agencies that can help. So these are also important because you can't do research without money. Well,
and so you've spoken to us about your research, and it's been fascinating going from how to collect data, how to look at the data, all the way to multi-centric studies. So you've seen anesthesia progress over the course of your career over the last 20 years, and we know that there's been a lot of technological advancement. What do you believe would be the next big game changer in anesthesia? It could be a teaching tool, it could be a specialization, or it could be a direction for the whole specialty to move in. What do you think anesthesia is going to look like?
I think what I look forward to is anesthesiologists leading the way in perioperative care. Okay, and by that, I don't just mean ERAS programs. Okay, I think it will involve not only building on our knowledge of anesthesiology, beyond, like I said, the clinical markers that we train in, but changing the way on which we prepare patients for surgery, improving the resilience of patients before they even come for surgery.
So prehabilitation of sorts.
Prehabilitation, beyond prehabilitation. And that was my talk this morning earlier, where we are looking at neuroscience and what it has to offer in how do we manage these patients with chronic diseases. When we try to climb Mount Everest, you train, right? So now when you come for surgery, we train somewhat by prehab. Maybe we give some nutritional support, but is there more? That's the question I like to pose. It could come from neuroscience, it could come from somewhere else. I know it has maybe you think the patient in front of you cannot be improved, but I like to, challenge that misconception because, I think the patient in front of us can be prepared better for meeting the challenge of that surgery.
Wow, so improving what we would have earlier considered non-modifiable risk factors.
Exactly. And, like I mentioned, the take-home message is biological age, surprisingly, is reversible or is fluid. So you can actually change your biological age.
So you can reverse age and biologically.
Biological age, not chronological age.
Yeah.
You have to turn back. Yes. But biological aging is influenced by a lot of other things, and it can be reversed. So it's interesting. But we know very little of that. But we know that surgery will age a person. But when that stress is removed, it can be improved. So, and we don't know a lot of, knowledge in this. And that's why I'm very interested to look into how this knowledge can be used. So we need to improve our own knowledge and see if it plays a role in anesthesia. So anesthesiologists must lead the way.
This is remarkable. So we would not only take a bigger role ahead of surgery, we would also be looking at how our role before surgery has impacted the post-operative period as well.
Yes, and that has to continue intraoperatively.
Of
We've
course.
done very well intraoperatively.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, over the past few decades, we have brought down the intraoperative deaths to very low incidence. You know, and like I said, it's because the anesthesiologist is there, you know, but we could obviously still do better. But post-operatively, 99% of deaths occur post-operatively. What can we do? What is our expertise there? Why do they get septic? Why do they get myocardial injury? We are just scratching the surface. So research is fascinating. And I'm looking to the younger generation and all generation to look into this. And as anesthesiologists, we must have a role.
I think you absolutely mentioned that. When we talk about anesthesiologists, we were talking to the other speakers also. They have the prime role in the perioperative care. And their integration itself will give a lot of understanding and improving the patient outcome. Sometimes, maybe you can say it's my personal belief, you're also equally responsible to have their span of life increased. And I was interviewing somebody in a previous wedding that remembers it. And the physiologist, it is our responsibility not to give something that even leads to damage of one myocyte or one neuron or
one episode of hypotension should also be avoided.
Hypotension, because our body says that even if we lose 20, 30, 40% of nephrons or hepatocytes or myocytes or bases, nothing will be obviously negative. But then it becomes our duty of understanding what you just talked about, the genetics, pharmacogenetics, and all those phenomena. Why do we want to even damage them? And this is what is the interesting phenomena coming up nowadays when you said we need to monitor, we need to collect data, we need to select not just the soft outcome parameters for a study, but we need to look for the long-term impact. And this is what we have nicely emphasized actually.
The research question and the potential is huge. So, sitting where I am, how would you advise a young anesthesiologist attempting to embark on a path of research? How do you achieve both clinical work and research, robust, good quality research simultaneously?
Well, I've been fortunate in that I have good mentors to begin with. I think I've been very persistent. It's not easy to do research. What is always needed for research, apart from having the idea, is that we need to look for, your time, money, all right, to do research. But to get started, you need to have a track record. So you need to build a track record. But to build a track record, you need to be given the time. But to be given the time, you need to have a track record. So, you have to start somewhere. So I think that at least in our hospitals, when I came back from the US, I was given the task of being the research director for the department. So I felt that, we should try to encourage the younger researchers on their journey. And at that same time, we had the setting up of an academic medical center. Our hospital wants to deal with more academic work. And so they started to give out some of these seed funding. So that's something for consideration, whether it's from the hospital level or the department level or even from philanthropy, to just give some seed funding so that it's easier for them to, get started. If you can't give the time, perhaps you can hire someone to help you collect the data because you may need a research assistant.
And your seed funding can help pay for the...
Yeah, maybe something like, yeah. So those are things that on the departmental level you can do. And then you need to slowly start building up the core team of researchers within the department, and people who are interested. There are always people interested, but you must seek them out. And you must, set the vision, set the mission, set the goals. And when you have this core group to mentor the younger ones, especially when they run into the difficulties, then it becomes easier. And, we seek opportunities, we seek funding all the time so that we can engage more people. Sometimes you may have to ask more established researchers if they could help our younger ones. So there are many ways to do this to help the younger researcher. But we must first of all encourage them. I always encourage them by asking them, what is your research question? Actually, you have a lot of questions. You just have to think deeper into it and come up with a research question. And then we help them to refine that question, to do the literature search, to make sure that they fine-tune what they're asking for. And then we look for resources to help them along the way.
And we also know that you're a very passionate teacher. You're a first-year medical student under you won an award for a paper on anesthesia. As a first-year resident, I could barely wrap my head around anesthesia. How are you able to communicate what anesthesia is and create so much interest in an MBBS student? That's...
Well, I think when, you have a genuine interest in people, they will come to you. So I started with my first mentee. They say that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with that first single step. So I first started with this medical student. She was my index student. And we basically sat down and said, okay, we're going to do this database. Let's look at AKI. So she did her first paper and she got credit for that. So she was very happy. And that news kind of spread amongst the medical students because medical students are always seeking mentors.
Yes.
So
definitely.
Yeah. So when they hear that a medical student has published a paper and was given the first authorship, they got very excited. So they came to look for me. And when you get a student, you need to train them. They're like a diamond in the rough. Okay, you need to polish them. You need to, teach them to think what a researcher mindset should be. So you need to break it down, what cardiac anesthesia is, what cardiopulmonary bypass is. And actually, it's not very difficult to understand. In fact, heparin was discovered by a medical student. You know that?
No, I had no idea.
Yes.
Heparin, wow.
So, it's just that, they haven't put on their research thinking cap. So you have to keep pushing them to think critically. And, you can teach them, you can mentor them, and you show them the data. And, well, you need to train them when they go for presentation. And even, how they speak, how they present, what they say, you preempt all the questions. And he did a fabulous job. In fact, he was leading the judge to ask him certain questions. So I thought he did a fabulous job.
You sound like such a proud teacher at this moment talking about your student, and very lucky student for sure. And what you're saying is, I can echo all of us young anesthesiologists embarking on this journey. We're desperately looking for mentorship and this sort of a picture that you've set, how to go about it, where you start. If you can make an MBBS student understand cardiopulmonary bypass and cardiac anesthesia, then I think all of us feel a little bit more hopeful of how we might be able to manage on the same lines.
Oh, I'm very sure that, there'll be no problem for all of you to do the same. No, I'm just doing a very small part, honestly. But yes, I think if the student shows interest, they're willing to learn, you can break things down very simply for them. They would understand. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes, the other thing I do is that, you start with one, but you build a community. So my index student became a mentor to other students. So my mentee is now a mentor. By the way, my mentee has now become a associate consultant in my department, my very first student. So, you build a community.
That's wonderful.
And student can take on, things, very simple things. They know you show them to do the data analysis, they can teach their fellow students. And the most difficult part usually is not the data analysis or the collection of the data, it's the manuscript. So you need to teach them how to do the manuscript writing. And after a while, it's such a joy because you see them improving, and they start to write in the correct way that a research manuscript should be written. So you build a community, each one lifting the other one, and the thing will spread. And so you have a community of young researchers supporting them, and that's what I do.
That's beautiful. You've held several leadership positions in Singapore. You also lead multi-centric studies. What is your vision for collaboration between countries in the Asia Pacific region? How do you envision that would happen, and what would you suggest? How do we go about it?
Well, I think it is very important that we come together to answer the questions relevant to this part of the world. We have always relied on Western data, but sometimes just a simple thing. In the cardiac surgical population, for example, in Singapore, 50% of our patients are diabetic. In the Western population, only 20%. I'm not sure what it is in India, but our incidence of diabetes in Singapore is really very high. So it's very different. So I think we need to have local data. And so I think meetings like this are so meaningful because we start to establish, the key contact persons, the network that we need to build up. And we need to start conversations in which we can build these bridges between the different societies. For us, we started with the ASEAN group because we have an ASEAN meeting all the time. So, we go to each other's meetings. So it's quite easy to get our our Southeast Asian partners, but we would love to work with India, and we recently also have meetings with South Korea. They have been very active in also signing a lot of MOUs with a lot of the regional societies. And I think when we have this sort of collaborative efforts, we need to say, how about including somebody else? We include these other people, we make the group bigger. And I think that's important because we should not just keep a good thing small. We should build on each other's strengths and see what we can do for each other. So the most recent one we had, that we signed an MOU at the recent WCA, the World Congress, we have an Asian Malignant Hyperthermia Alliance. So, it is also an area of research that is important for our part of the world. And again, if India is willing, we'll say, come, join the alliance, So these are things that we do, and that's why all these meetings are so important for us to share, what are some of the things that we can do together.
Thank you so much for your time, ma'am. I've learned a lot. And so when you initially look at what you're doing and what you've done, it looks very large scale, very large. But when you're able to break it down into one research question, identify this data that answers that question, that sounds a lot more doable for me and for probably everyone who's embarking on a research journey.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you. And your role, speaking about mentorship, is very nice. It's valuable. And thank you for putting it out there. I think it's great information to have. And this would be very useful to all our subscribers, all our viewers. And as we say in the IJA podcast, stay safe, stay curious, and we will reach out to you soon with more interesting such conversations with luminaries from around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.